I'm Brittany, this is Merlin, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. We get to start! King's Rising, oh my god, as I drop my phone fully off my desk, we get to start King's Rising, Book 3 in the Captive Prince trilogy. We get to start that today. Sorry, I'm so excited. I've just completely blanked on how to be any kind of even remotely effective YouTuber. We read for a couple of hours. We take a break around halfway through. There are trigger warnings in the description of this stream in case you need to avail yourself of them, as, you know, you might very well need to do with something like Captive Prince. If you're new here, hello. Hi. Welcome. This is, I just got, a serotonin high from how excited I am. This might just be my favorite book in the trilogy. It really might, which is seriously saying something, but I can't. The only way I can properly explain myself is to just start reading it. So I think that's what we're going to do. Please keep the chat spoiler free, because there are always people here who have not read the book before. And we love to keep them spoiler-free for that. I have read this series. I love this series. I don't know if you could tell by my levels of excitement. I haven't read the series in a while, but I have read it a good few times. However, it has been rather interesting, the things that I have forgotten anyway, despite the fact that I've literally studied this. So, we're starting with Chapter 1. We might get all the way through Chapter 5 today. We might have to stop at a scene break somewhere in the middle there. It just kind of depends on how much I talk. Although there's never enough time to chat about everything about this series, which is one of the reasons why I have turned a reading warm-up space that I had for YouTube members and patrons into some extra book chat time. So over Tuesdays and Thursdays before this stream that you're looking at right now, there will be about a half hour, maybe a little bit more, where we talk about what we have read on the previous stream. And so we get a bit of a recap. We get to maybe go into some stuff that we didn't have time to go into during the stream. It's a nice bit of extra supplemental programming for you. And we just had the first one, and it went rather fabulously well, despite it being a little bit chaotic because we were trying to talk about the first two books rather than just what we had read previously. But it was so nice. It was so nice to get to talk about some things in greater depth. So if that is up your alley, that is now a thing that happens at 2:15 before these streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And now, lagging, we're getting lag. Hang on. Oh, that's funny. I don't think, it doesn't look like it seems to be lagging. I haven't dropped any frames. Are we still lagging? Oh, only some people are getting lag. That's interesting. Let me go ahead and experiment with, because things do look good on my end, but let me experiment real quick with there will definitely have been a jump on your guys' end, but there will definitely have been a jump on your guys' end now that I'm seeing OBS reconnecting, but it should now be better for everyone. So if we are, oh yeah, and then there's also the turn it off, turn it on again, refresh the page if you are also having issues. But now for anyone who was having issues, that should be fixed. So, as we begin Chapter 1 of King's Rising, here we go. No big deal. We just had Damon fully spotted and recognized and exposed as Damianos with a bunch of Achielans and Nikandros at the fort, surrounded by, you know, Varetians loyal to the prince. So that's the energy we're kicking off with today. as we get into book 3. I can't contain my excitement. I really can't. If I could, I probably wouldn't have this job. All right. Damianos. Damon stood at the base of the dais steps as his name spread in tones of shock and disbelief over the courtyard. Nikandros knelt before him. His army knelt before him. It was like coming home, until his name, rippling outwards over the ranks of the gathered Achaean soldiers, hit the Varetian commoners thronging the edges of the space, where it changed. The shock was different, a doubled shock, a rippling impact now of anger, of alarm. Damon heard the first voice in outcry, a swell of violence, a new word now in the mouths of the crowd. Prince Killer. A hiss of a rock thrown. Nikandros came up off his knees, drawing his sword. Damon flung out a hand in a motion for halt, stopping Nikandros instantly, his sword showing a half-foot of Achaean steel. He could see the confusion on Nikandros' face as the courtyard around them began to disintegrate. Damianos. Order your men to hold, said Damon, even as the sharp sound of steel closer by had him turning fast. A Varetian soldier in a gray helmet had drawn his sword and was staring at Damon as though he faced his worst nightmare. It was Huey. Damon recognized the white face under the helmet. Huey was holding his sword out before him the way Jord had held the knife, between two shaking hands. Damianos, said Huey. Hold, Damon ordered again, shouting to be heard over the crowd, over the new hoarse cry in Achaean. Treason! It was death to draw a blade on a member of the Achaean royal family. He was still keeping Nikandros back with the gesture of his outflung hand, but he could feel every sinew in Nikandros strain in the effort to hold himself in place. There were wild shouts now, the thin perimeter breaking down as the crowd swelled with the panicked urge to run. To stampede, too excited, to stampede and get out of the way of the Achaean army, or to swarm over it. He saw Guimar scan the courtyard, the tense fear in his eyes clear. Soldiers could see what a peasant mob could not, that the Achaean force inside the walls, outnumbered the skeletal Varetian garrison 15-1. Another sword was drawn alongside Huey's, a horrified Varetian soldier. Anger and disbelief showed in the faces of some of the Varetian guard. In others there was fear, looking to one another desperately for guidance. And in the first spilling breach in the perimeter, the spiraling frenzy of the crowd, the Varetian guards no longer fully under his control, Damon saw how completely he had underestimated the effect of his identity on the men and women of this fort. Damianos. Prince Killer. His mind, used to battlefield decisions, took in the sweep of the courtyard and made the commander's choice, to minimize losses, to limit bloodshed and chaos, and to secure Ravenel. The Varetian guards were beyond his orders, and the Varetian people, if these bitter, furious emotions could be soothed among the Varetian people, he was not the one to soothe them. There was only one way to stop what was about to happen, and that was to contain it, to lock it down, to secure this place once and for all. Damon said to Nikandros, "Take the fort." Ah! I'm all right. Whew. That's going to look great to anyone Varetian, right? Bunch of Achaeans show up on a Varetian fort, and then, oh my god, it's Damianos the Prince Killer, and now the fort belongs to Achaeans? It's going to look great. It's going to look great. It's going to communicate a whole bunch of really great things. Also, Octagonal says low-key kind of hot, and they're right. So, that was a scene break, by the way. Damon swept along the passage, flanked by 6 Achaean guards. Achaean voices rang in the halls, and red Achaean flags flew over Ravenel. Achaean soldiers on either side of the doorway drew their heels together as he passed. Ravenel had now changed allegiance twice in as many days. This time it had happened swiftly. Damon knew exactly how to subdue this fort. The skeleton Varetian force had quickly buckled in the courtyard, and Damon had ordered their 2 senior soldiers, Guimar and Jord, brought to him, stripped of armor and under guard. As Damon entered the small antechamber, the Achielan guards took hold of their 2 prisoners and thrust them roughly to the ground. "Kneel," the guard commanded in mangled Varetian. Jord sprawled. "No, let them stand." Damon gave the order in Achielan. Instant obedience. It was Guimar who shrugged the treatment off and regained his feet first. Jord, who had known Damon for months, was more circumspect, rising slowly. Guimar met Damon's eyes. He spoke in Varetian, giving no sign that he had understood Achielan. "So it's true. You are Damianos of Achielos." "It's true." Guimar purposefully spat, and for his trouble was backhanded hard across the face with a mailed fist by the Achielan soldier. Damon let it happen, aware of what would have happened if a man had spat on the ground in front of his father. "Are you here to put us to the sword?" Guimar's words were spoken as his eyes returned to Damon. Damon's gaze passed over him, then over Jord. He saw the grime on their faces, their drawn, tight expressions. Jord had been the captain of the prince's guard. He knew Guimar less well. Guimar had been a commander in Tuar's army before he defected to Laurent's side, but both men had been ranked officers. It was why he had ordered them brought here. "I want you to fight with me," said Damon. "Achielos is here to stand by your side." Guimar let out a shaky breath. "Fight with you. You will use our cooperation to take the fort." "I already have the fort," said Damon. He said it calmly. "You know the manner of man we face in the Regent," said Damon. "Your men have a choice. They can remain prisoners at Ravenel, or they can ride with me to Charie and show the Regent we stand together." "We don't stand together," said Guimar. "You betrayed our prince." And then, as though he almost couldn't bear to say it, "You had him." "Take him out," said Damon, cutting it off. He dismissed the Achielan guards, too, and they filed out until the antechamber was deserted, except for the one man he allowed to stay. In Jord's face was none of the mistrust or fear that had been stamped so clearly on the faces of the other Varetians, but a weary search for understanding. Damon said, "I made him a promise." "And when he learns who you are," said Jord, "when he learns that he is facing Damianos on the field." "Then he and I meet each other for the first time," said Damon. That was also a promise. It's a scene break. Hang on. We need Merlin. Ooh. When it was done, he found himself pausing, his hand on the doorframe to catch his breath. He thought of his name, spreading through Ravenel, across the province, to its target. He had a sense of holding on, as though if he just held the fort, held these men together long enough to reach Charie, then what followed? He couldn't think about what followed. All he could do was keep to his promise. He pushed open the door and walked into the small hall. Nikandros turned when Damon entered, and their eyes met. Before Damon could speak, Nikandros went to one knee, not spontaneously as he had done in the courtyard, but deliberately, bending his head. "The fort is yours," Nikandros said. "My king." King. The ghost of his father seemed to prickle over his skin. It was his father's title, but his father no longer sat on the throne at Ios. It's not Ios. I think it's Eos, if I remember correctly. Looking at the bowed head of his friend, Damon realized it for the first time. He was no longer the young prince who had roamed the palace halls with Nikandros after a day spent wrestling together on the sawdust. There was no Prince Damianos. The self that he had been striving to return to was gone. To gain everything and lose everything in the space of a moment, that is the fate of all princes destined for the throne. Laurent had said that. Damon took in Nikandros' familiar, classically Achielan features, his dark hair and brows, his olive face and straight Achielan nose. As children, they had run barefoot together through the palace. When he'd imagined a return to Achielos, he'd imagined greeting Nikandros, embracing him, heedless of the armor, like digging in his fingers and feeling in his fist the earth of his home. Instead, Nikandros knelt in an enemy fort, his sparse Achielan armor incongruous in the Varetian setting, and Damon felt the gulf of distance that separated them. "Rise," said Damon, "old friend." He wanted to say so much. He felt it welling up inside him, 100 moments when he had forced back the doubt that he would ever see Achielos, the high cliffs, the opaline sea, and the faces like this one, of those that he called friend. "I thought you dead," said Nikandros. "I have mourned your passing." Ooh, I lit the brand new word. Ekthanos? That's my first best attempt. "And made the long walk at dawn when I thought you gone." Nikandros spoke still partly in wonder as he rose. "Damianos, what happened to you?" Damon thought of the soldiers bursting into his rooms, of being lashed down in the slave baths, of the dark, muffled journey by ship to Vare. He thought of being confined, his face painted, his body drugged and displayed. He thought of opening his eyes in the Varetian palace, and what had happened to him there. "You were right about Castor," Damon said. It was all he said. "I watched him crowned at the King's Meet," said Nikandros. His eyes were dark. "He stood on the Kingstone and said, 'This twin tragedy has taught us that all things are possible.'" Bitch. It sounded like Castor. It sounded like Jocasta. Damon thought of how it would have been in Achielos. The Kuroi gathered among the ancient stones of the King's Meet, Castor enthroned with Jocasta beside him, her hair immaculate and her swollen belly swathed, slaves fanning the air in the still heat. He said to Nikandros, "Tell me." He heard it. He heard all of it. He heard of his own body, wrapped and taken in the processional through the Acropolis, then interred beside his father. He heard Castor's claim that he had been killed by his own guard. He heard of his guard, killed in turn, like his childhood trainer, Haman, like his squires, like his slaves. Nikandros spoke of the confusion and slaughter throughout the palace, and in its wake, Castor's swordsmen taking control, claiming wherever they were challenged that they were containing the bloodshed, not causing it. He remembered the sound of bells at dusk. "Theomedes is dead. All hail Castor." Nikandros said, "There's more." Nikandros hesitated for a moment, searching Damon's face. Then he pulled the letter from his leather breastplate. It was battered, and by far the worse for its method of conveyance, but when Damon took it and unfolded it, he saw why Nikandros had kept it close. "To the Kairos of Delphi, Nikandros, from Laurent, Prince of Vare." Damon felt the hairs rise over his body. The letter was old. The writing was old. Laurent must have sent the letter from Arles. Damon thought of him, alone, politically cornered, sitting at his desk to begin writing. He remembered Laurent's limpid voice. "Do you think I'd get on well with Nikandros of Delphi?" It made tactical sense, in a horrifying way, for Laurent to have made an alliance with Nikandros. Laurent had always been capable of a kind of ruthless pragmatism. He was able to put emotion aside and do what he had to do to win, with a perfect and nauseating ability to ignore all human feeling. In return for aid from Nikandros, the letter said, Laurent would offer proof that Castor had colluded with the regent to kill King Theomedes of Achielos. It was the same information that Laurent had flung at him last night. "You poor dumb brute. Castor killed the king, then took the city with my uncle's troops." "There were questions," said Nikandros. "But for every question Castor had an answer. He was the king's son, and you were dead. There was no one left to rally behind," Nikandros said. "Ooh. Menaidos, Menaidos of Sicyon was the first to swear his loyalty, and beyond that, Damon said, the South belongs to Castor. He knew what he faced. He had never supposed to hear that the story of his brother's treachery was a mistake, to hear that Castor was overjoyed by the news that he lived and welcomed his return. Nikandros said, the North is loyal. And if I call on you to fight? Then we fight, said Nikandros. Together. The straightforward ease of it left him without words. He had forgotten what home felt like. He had forgotten trust, loyalty, kinship, friends. Nikandros drew something from a fold in his clothing and pressed it into Damon's hand. This is yours. I have kept it. A foolish token. I knew it was treason. I wanted to remember you by it. A crooked half-smile. Your friend is a fool and courts treason for a keepsake. Damon opened his hand. The curl of mane, the arc of a tail. Nikandros had given him the golden lion pin worn by the king. Theomedes had passed it on to Damon on his 17th birthday to mark him as heir. Damon remembered his father fixing it to his shoulder. Nikandros must have risked execution to find it, to take it and to carry it with him. You are too quick to pledge yourself to me. He felt the hard, bright edges of the pin in his fist. You are my king, said Nikandros. He saw it reflected back at him in Nikandros' eyes, as he had seen it in the eyes of the men. He felt it in the different way Nikandros behaved towards him. King. The pin was his now, and soon the bannermen would come and pledge to him as king, and nothing would be the way it was before. To gain everything and lose everything in the space of a moment, that is the fate of all princes destined for the throne. He clasped Nikandros' shoulder, the wordless touch all he would allow himself. You look like a wall tapestry. Nikandros plucked at Damon's sleeve, amused by red velvet fastenings of garnet and small, exquisitely sewn rows of ruching. Is it rushing? Is it ruching? We don't know. This is how familiar I am with fashion and clothing terms. And then he went still. Damon, said Nikandros, in a strange voice. Damon looked down and saw. His sleeve had slipped, revealing a cuff of heavy gold. Nikandros tried to move back, as though burned or stung, but Damon clasped his arm, preventing the retreat. He could see it, splitting Nikandros' brain, the unthinkable. His heart pounding, he tried to stop it, to salvage it. Yes, he said, Castor made me a slave. Laurent freed me. He gave me command of his fort and his troops, an act of trust for an Achiel, and he had no reason to elevate. He doesn't know who I am. The Prince of Vere freed you, said Nikandros. You have been his slave. His voice thickened with the words. You have served the Prince of Vere as a slave? Another step back. There was a shocked sound from the doorway. Damon whirled towards it, releasing his grip on Nikandros. Macedon stood in the doorway, a growing horror on his face, and behind him Straton, two of Nikandros' soldiers. Macedon and Nikandros' general, his most powerful bannerman, and he had come to pledge to Damianos as the bannerman had pledged to Damon's father. Damon stood, exposed, before them all. He flushed, hard. A golden wrist cuff had only one meaning, use and submission of the most private kind. He knew what they saw. 100 images of slaves submitting, bending at the hip, parting their thighs, the casual ease with which these men would have taken slaves in their own households. He remembered himself saying, "Leave it on." His chest felt tight. He forced himself to keep untying laces, pushing his sleeve up further. Does it shock you? I was a personal gift to the Prince of Vere. He had bared his whole forearm. Nikandros turned to Macedon, his voice harsh. You will not speak of this. You will never speak of this outside this room. Damon said, no, it can't be hidden. He said it to Macedon. A man of his father's generation, Macedon was the commander of one of the largest of the provincial armies of the north. Behind him, Straton's distaste looked like nausea. The two secondary officers had their eyes on the floor, too low ranked to do anything else in the presence of the king, especially in the face of what they were seeing. You were the prince's slave. Revulsion was stamped on Macedon's face, whitening it. Yes. You... Macedon's words echoed the unspoken question in Nikandros' eyes that no man would ever say aloud to his king. Damon's flush changed in quality. You dare ask that? Macedon said, thickly. You are our king. This is an insult to Achilleus that cannot be borne. You will bear it, said Damon, holding Macedon's gaze, as I have borne it. Or do you think yourself above your king? Oh, Jesus Christ. That was some, not that Damon hasn't displayed his, smartassery plenty of times to great effect, and I love him so much. But something about that says he's been around Laurent a little too much. He's been exposed to Laurent's way of twisting things back on people just a little too much. The Laurent influence just kind of peeked right in there. Whew. Slave, said the resistance in Macedon's eyes. Macedon certainly had slaves in his own household and made use of them. What he imagined between prince and slave stripped it of all the subtleties of surrender. Having been done to his king, it had in some sense been done to him, and his pride revolted at it. If this becomes common knowledge, I can't guarantee I will be able to control the actions of the men, said Nikandros. It is common knowledge, said Damon. He watched the words impact on Nikandros, who could not quite swallow them. What would you have us do? Nikandros pushed the words out. Make your pledge, said Damon. And if you are mine, gather the men to fight. Whew! That's a scene break. Oh man. This is just what a way to open the third book. The plan he had developed with Laurent was simple and relied on timing. Charie was not a field like Helay, with a single clear vantage. Charie was a pocketed hilly trap, half-backed by forest, where a well-positioned force could quickly manufacture a surround on an approaching troop. It was the reason the regent had chosen Charie as the place where he would challenge his nephew. Inviting Laurent to a fair fight at Charie was like smiling and inviting him to take a stroll across quicksand. So they had split their forces. Laurent had ridden out 2 days ago to approach from the north and reverse the regent's surround by bringing up at the rear. Damon's men were the bait. He looked for a long time at the wrist cuff before he walked out onto the dais. It was bright gold, visible at some distance against the skin of his wrist. He didn't try to hide it. He had discarded his wrist gauntlets. He wore the Achillean breastplate, the short leather skirt, the high Achillean sandals strapped to his knee. His arms were bare, as were his legs from knee to mid-thigh. The short red cape was pinned to his shoulder by the golden lion. Armored and battle-ready, he stepped out onto the dais and looked out at the army that was gathered below, the immaculate lines and shining spears, all of it waiting for him. He let them see the cuff on his wrist, as he let them see him. He knew by now the ever-present whisper, Damianos, risen from the dead. He watched the army fall silent before him. He let the prince he had been drop away. Let himself feel the new role, the new self settle about him. Men of Achilleus, he said, his words echoing across the courtyard. He looked out at the rows of red cloaks, and it felt as if to take up a sword or fit a gauntlet to his hand. I am Damianos, true son of Theomedes, and I have returned to fight for you as your king. A deafening roar of approval, spear butts hammering into the ground in approbation. He saw arms raised, soldiers cheering, and caught a flash of the impassive, helmed face of Macedon. Damon swung up into the saddle. He had taken the same horse he had ridden at Helay, a big bay gelding that could take his weight. It struck its front hoof on the cobbles, as though seeking to overturn a stone, arcing its neck, perhaps sensing, in the manner of all great beasts, that they were on the cusp of war. The horns sounded. The standards went up. There was a sudden clatter, like a handful of marbles cast down steps, and a small group of Varetians in battered blue rode into the courtyard on horseback. Not Guimar, but Jord and Huet, Lazar. Scanning their faces, Damon saw who they were. These were the men of the Prince's Guard, with whom Damon had traveled for months, and there was only one reason why they had been released from confinement. Damon held up a hand, and Jord was allowed through, so that for a moment their horses circled each other. "We've come to ride with you," said Jord. Damon looked at the small clump of blue now gathered before the rows of red in the courtyard. There weren't many of them, only 20, and he saw at once that it was Jord who had convinced them, so that they were here, mounted and ready. "Then we ride," said Damon, "for Achielos and for Vere." Another scene break. Jord being the fucking real one. I love him so much. Oh. As they approached Charie, long-range visibility was poor, and they had to rely on outriders and scouts for information. The regent was approaching from the north and the northwest. Their own forces, acting as bait, were downslope and in an inferior position. Damon would never bring men into this kind of disadvantage without a counterplan. As it was, it would be a close fight. Nikandros didn't like it. The closer they came to Charie, the more obvious it was to the Achaean generals how bad the ground was. If you wanted to kill your worst enemy, you would lure them to a place like this. "Trust me," was the last thing Laurent had said. He envisaged the plan as they had constructed it in Ravenel, the regent overcommitting, and Laurent at the perfect moment. Laurent at the perfect moment sweeping down from the north. He wanted it, wanted a hard fight, wanted to seek out the regent on the field, find him and take him down, to end his reign in a single fight. If he did just that, just kept to his promise, then after, Damon gave the order to form up. There would be the danger of arrows soon. They would take their first volley from the north. "Hold," was his order. The uncertain terrain was a valley of doubt, fringed by trees and dangerous slopes. The air was laden with tense expectation, and the high-strung, raw mood that came before battle. Distantly, the sound of horns. "Hold," Damon said again, as his horse fidgeted, fractious, beneath him. They must fully engage the regent's forces here on the flat before they counterattacked, draw them all here, in order to allow Laurent's men to manufacture a surround. Instead, he saw the western flank begin to move, too soon, under the shouted order of Macedon. "Call them back into line," Damon said, putting his heels hard into his horse. He reined in around Macedon, a small, tight circle. Macedon looked back at him, dismissive as a general of a child. "We are moving to the west." "My orders are to hold," said Damon. "We let the regent commit first to draw him out of position. If we do that and your Varetian doesn't arrive, we'll all be killed." "He'll be here," said Damon. From the north, the sound of horns. The regent was too close, too early, with no word yet from their scouts. Something was wrong. Action exploded to his left, movement bursting from the trees. The attack came from the north, charging from the slope in the tree line. Ahead of it was a solitary rider, a scout, racing flat out over the grass. The regent's men were on them, and Laurent wasn't within 100 miles of the battle. Laurent had never planned to come. That was what the scout was screaming right before an arrow took him in the back. "This is your Varetian prince exposed for what he is," said Macedon. Damon had no time to think before the situation was on him. He shouted orders, trying to take hold of the initial chaos. As the first rain of arrows hit, his mind taking in the new situation, recalculating numbers and position. "He'll be here," Damon had said, and he believed that, even as the first wave hit and the man around him began to die. There was a dark logic to it. Have your slave convince the Achaeans to fight. Let your enemies do your fighting for you, the casualties taken by the people you despise, the regent defeated or weakened, and the armies of Nikandros wiped out. It wasn't until the second wave hit them from the northwest that he realized they were totally alone. Damon found himself alongside Jord. If you want to live, ride east. White-faced, Jord took one look at his expression and said, He's not coming. We're outnumbered, said Damon, but if you run, you might still make it out. If we're outnumbered, what are you going to do? Damon drove his horse onward, ready to take up his own place on the front line. He said, Fight. That's the end of chapter 1. We're on page 20 for chapter 2. Whew. Laurent woke slowly, in dim light, to the sensation of restriction, his hands tied behind his back. Throbbing at the base of his skull let him know he had been hit over the head. Something was also inconveniently and intrusively wrong with his shoulder. It was dislocated. You're fucking kidding me. You're fucking kidding me. This is how this bitch starts chapter 2. This is chapter 2. This is how she opens the novel. This is how she opens the third. This is the opening of the third. Listen. My brain being what it is, can I remember exactly why I have the inclination that this is my favorite book in the trilogy? No, I really can't. This is probably the book that I remember the least, so to speak, despite some, of the most major happenings, right? And yet, it has been imprinted on my soul, the impression that this is my favorite book. And it is fantastic to only be on page 20, and so far have the deep vindication that that part of my soul is indeed correct. As his lashes fluttered and his body stirred, he became hazily aware of a stale odor and a chilled temperature that suggested that he was underground. His intellect made increasing sense of this. There had been an ambush. He was underground, and since his body didn't feel as if it had been transported for days, that meant he opened his eyes and met the flat-nosed stare of Gaywatch. That's the second paragraph of the second chapter on page fucking 20 of this goddamn book. Hello, princess. Panic spiked his pulse, an involuntary reaction, his blood beating against the inside of his skin like it was trapped. Very carefully, he made himself do nothing. The cell itself was about 12 feet square and had an entrance of bars but no windows. Beyond the door there was a flickering stone passageway. The flickering came from a torch on that side of the bars, not from the fact that he had been hit over the head. There was nothing inside the cell except the chair he was tied to. The chair, made of heavy oak, appeared to have been dragged in for his benefit, which was civilized or sinister depending on how one looked at it. The torchlight revealed the accumulated filth on the floor. He was hit by the memory of what had happened to his men and put that, with effort, out of his mind. He knew where he was. These were the prison cells of Fortaine. He understood that he faced his death, before which would come a long, painful interval. A ludicrous, boyish hope flared that someone would come to help him, and carefully he extinguished it. Since the age of 13, there had been no rescuer, for his brother was dead. He wondered if it was going to be possible to salvage some dignity in this situation, and canceled that thought as soon as it came. This was not going to be dignified. He thought that if things got very bad, it was within his capabilities to precipitate the end. Gavar would not be difficult to provoke into lethal violence. At all. He thought that Auguste would not be afraid. Being alone and vulnerable to a man who planned to kill him, it should not trouble his younger brother. It was harder to let go of the battle, to leave his plans at their midway point, to accept that the deadline had come and gone, and that whatever now happened on the border, he would not be a part of it. The Achiellan slave would, of course, assume treachery on the part of the Varetian forces, after which he would launch some sort of noble and suicidal attack at Charie that he would probably win against ridiculous odds. He thought if he merely ignored the fact that he was injured and tied up, it was 1-on-1, which weren't terrible odds of his own, except that he could feel in this, as he could always feel, the invisible guiding hand of his uncle. 1-on-1. He must think about what he could practically achieve. On his best day, he could not take on Gavar in a wrestling match and win, and his shoulder was dislocated. Fighting free of his bonds at this moment would accomplish precisely nothing. He told himself that, once, then again, to quell a deep, basic urge to struggle. "We're alone," Gavar said. "Just you and me. Look around. Take a good look. There's no way out. Not even I have a key. They come to open the cell when I'm done with you. What do you have to say to that?" "How's your shoulder?" said Laurent. This man is a bitch, and I love him so much. The blow rocked him back. When he lifted his head, he enjoyed the look he had provoked on Gavar's face, as he had enjoyed, for the same reason, if a bit masochistically, the blow. Because he couldn't quite keep that from his eyes, Gavar hit him again. He had to strap down the impulse of hysteria, or this was going to be over very quickly. "I always wondered what it was you had on him," Laurent said. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "A bloody sheet and a signed confession?" "You think I'm stupid," said Gavar. "I think you have one piece of leverage over a very powerful man. I think whatever it is you have on him, it's not going to last forever." "You want to think that," said Gavar. His voice was heavy with satisfaction. "Want me to tell you why you're here? Because I asked him for you. He gives me what I want. He gives me whatever I want, even his untouchable nephew." "Well, I'm an inconvenience to him," said Laurent. "You are too. It's why he throws us together. At some point, one of us will dispatch the other." He made himself speak without undue emotion, just a mild remark on the facts. "The trouble is, when my uncle is the king, no leverage in the world will stop him. If you kill me, whatever it is that you have on him isn't going to matter. It will just be you and him, and he'll be free to disappear you into a dark cell, too." Gavar smiled, slowly. "He said you'd say that." The first misstep, and it was his own. He could feel the distracting beat of his heart. "What else did my uncle tell you I'd say?" "He said you'd try to keep me talking. He said you had a mouth like a whore. He said you'd lie, wheedle, suck up to me." The slow smile widened. "He said, the only way to make sure my nephew doesn't talk his way free is to cut his tongue out." As he spoke, Gavar pulled out a knife. The room around Laurent grayed. His whole attention narrowed, his thoughts attenuating. "Except that you want to hear it," said Laurent, "because this was only beginning, and it was a long, winding, bloody road till the end. You want to hear all of it, every last broken syllable. It's the one thing my uncle never understood about you." "Yeah? What's that?" "You always wanted to be on the other side of the door," said Laurent. "And now you are." It's a scene break. Jesus Lord. It's still deeply funny to me that, as everybody rightfully in the chat calls for the Regent's head, it's still deeply funny to me that I cannot remember what happens to the Regent. I can't. It's a total fucking blank. I have no idea. Oh. Did I say that was a scene break? That was a scene break. By the end of the first hour, though it felt longer, he was in quite a lot of pain and was losing touch with how much, if at all, he was delaying or controlling what was happening. Just in the way that she structures sentences in Laurent's POV is perfection. We don't have time to go into it, but it's perfection. It's exactly what you do when you are rendering two different characters' POVs. They are, unto themselves, Damon and Laurent, distinct. And because we have spent so much time in Damon's POV, shifting over to Laurent's feels immediately different in a variety of ways. That's the kind of shit that I eat for breakfast. I greatly dislike C.S. Picot. I hate her so much. His shirt was now unlaced to the waist and hung open, and his right sleeve was red. His hair was a tangled mess, ribboned with sweat. His tongue was intact because the knife was in his shoulder. He had accounted that a victory, when it had happened. You had to take pleasure in small victories. The hilt of the knife protruded at an odd angle. It was in his right shoulder, already dislocated, so that breathing was now painful. Victories. He had come this far. He had caused his uncle some small consternation, had checked him once or twice, forced him to remake his plans, had not made it easy. Layers of thick stone stood between him and the outside world. It was impossible to hear anything. It was impossible to be heard. His only advantage was that he had managed to free his left hand from its bonds. He couldn't let that be discovered. It would gain him nothing. It would gain him a broken arm. It was growing harder to stick to a course of action. Because it was impossible to hear anything, he reasoned, or had reasoned, when more detached, that whoever had put him in here with Gavar would return with a wheelbarrow and a sack to take him out, and that this would happen at a prearranged time, since there was no way for Gavar to signal. He therefore had a single goal, like moving towards a retreating mirage, to reach that point, alive. Even in this small way, being dropped into Laurent's stream of consciousness and his ability to analyze a situation even outside his own immediate reality and not get tunnel visioned into his specific experience, he's seeing the whole board, the whole chessboard, which, if you're not familiar with chess, that is part of chess 101, is seeing the whole board. That's one of the reasons why chess is such an unbelievably difficult game. You have to see the whole board, for starters. There's the whole board, and then you have to be able to identify your plan and the potential plans of your opponent. Those are like three of the biggest, most basic factors. Seeing the entire board sounds fundamental, but is an extremely valuable tool in all things, let alone situations like this where you have a knife sticking out of your dislocated arm and you're in a cell with one of the worst people imaginable. Footsteps, getting closer. The metallic scrape of an iron hinge. Guion's voice. This is taking too long. Squeamish, said Gavar. We're just getting started. You can stay and watch if you like. Does he know? Laurent said. His voice was a little hoarser than it had been starting out. His response to pain had been conventional. Guion was frowning. Know what? The secret. Your clever secret. What it is you have on my uncle. Shut up, said Gavar. What is he talking about? You never wondered, said Laurent, why my uncle kept him alive? Why he kept him in wine and women all these years? I said, shut your mouth. Closing his hand around the hilt of the knife, Gavar turned it. Blackness burst over him, so that he was only distantly aware of what followed. He heard Guion demanding in a tinny voice far away, What's he saying? You have some private arrangement with the king? You keep out of it. This isn't your business. Gavar. If you have some other arrangement, you will disclose it to me now. He felt Gauvard let go of the knife. Lifting his own hand was the second hardest thing he had ever done, after raising his head. Gauvard was moving to face down Guillaume, blocking his path to Laurent. Laurent closed his eyes, wrapped his unsteady left hand around the hilt, and pulled the knife out of his shoulder. He couldn't contain the low sound that escaped him. The two men turned as his fumbling hands cut his remaining bonds, and he staggered to stand behind the chair. Laurent held the knife in his left hand in as close to a correct defensive posture as he could presently manage. The room was wavering. The hilt of the knife was slippery. Gauvard smiled, amused and pleased, as a jaded voyeur at some unexpected minor final act of a play. Guillaume said, with mild irritation, but absolutely no urgency, "Get him back under control." They faced each other. Laurent had no illusions about his skill as a left-handed knife fighter. He knew how negligible a threat he presented to Gauvard, even on a day when he wasn't swaying. At his best, he would land a single knife strike before Gauvard closed on him. It wouldn't matter. Gauvard's structural bulk of muscle was layered over with a secondary bulk of fat. Gauvard could weather a single knife cut from a weakened, weaker opponent and keep fighting. The outcome of his brief excursion into freedom was inevitable. He knew it. Gauvard knew it. Laurent made a single clumsy left-handed strike with the knife, and Gauvard countered it brutally. And indeed, it was Laurent who cried out at the tearing pain beyond anything he had ever known. As, with his ruined right arm, Laurent swung the chair. The heavy oak hit Gauvard in the ear with the sound of a mallet striking a wooden ball. Gauvard staggered and went down. Laurent half-staggered too, the weight of the swing taking him part way across the cell. Guillaume was moving desperately out of his way, pressing his back to the wall. Laurent focused all his remaining strength on the task of reaching the barred door and placing himself on the other side of it, dragging it closed behind him and turning the key that was still in the lock. Gauvard didn't get up. In the stillness that followed, Laurent found his way from the bars to the open corridor, to the opposite wall, which he slid down, finding at the midway point that there was a wooden bench which took his weight. He had expected the floor. His eyes closed. He was dimly aware of Guillaume, tugging at the cell bars, which rattled and clanged and stayed irrefutably closed. He did laugh then. A breathless sound, with the sweet, cool feel of the stone at his back. His head lolled. "How dare you, you worthless traitor! You're a stain on your family's honor, you—" "Guillaume," said Laurent without opening his eyes, "you had me tied up and locked in a room with Gauvard. Do you think name-calling will hurt my feelings?" "Let me out!" The words ricocheted off the walls. "I tried that," said Laurent, calmly. Guillaume said, "I'll give you anything you want." "I tried that too," said Laurent. "I don't like to think of myself as predictable, but apparently I cycle through all the usual responses. Shall I tell you what you're going to do when I stick the knife in for the first time?" His eyes opened. Guillaume took a single, gratifying step back from the bars. "You know, I wanted a weapon," said Laurent. "I wasn't expecting one to walk into my cell." "You're a dead man when you walk out of here. Your Achiellan allies aren't going to help you. You left them to die like rats in a trap at Charie. They'll hunt you down," said Guillaume, "and kill you." "Yes, I'm aware that I have missed my rendezvous," said Laurent. The passageway flickered. He reminded himself that this was just the torch. He heard the dreamy sound of his own voice. "There was a man I was supposed to meet. He's got all these ideas about honor and fair play, and he tries to keep me from doing the wrong thing. But he's not here right now, unfortunately for you." Guillaume took another step back. "There's nothing you can do to me." "Isn't there? I wonder how my uncle is going to react when he finds out that you killed Gauvard and helped me to escape." And then, in the same dreamy voice, "Do you think he'll hurt your family?" Guillaume's hands were fists, like he still had them wrapped around bars. "I didn't help you escape." "Didn't you? I don't know how these rumors get started." Laurent regarded him through the bars. He was aware of the return of his critical faculties, in place of which, up to now, had been the tenacious adherence to a single idea. "Here's what has become painfully clear. My uncle instructed that if you captured me, you were to let Gavar have me, which was a tactical blunder, but my uncle had his hands tied, thanks to his private arrangement with Gavar. Or maybe he just liked the idea. You agreed to do his bidding. Torturing the heir to death wasn't an act you wanted attached to your own name, however. I'm not certain why. I can only surmise, despite a truly staggering array of evidence to the contrary, that there is still some rationality left on the council. I was put in an empty set of cells, and you came with the key yourself, because no one else knows I'm here. Pressing his left hand to his shoulder, he pushed away from the wall and came forward. Guillaume, inside the cell, was breathing shallowly. No one knows I'm here, which means no one knows you're here. No one's going to look. No one's going to come. No one's going to find you. His voice was steady as he held Guillaume's gaze through the bars. No one's going to help your family when my uncle comes. All smiles. He could see Guillaume's pinched expression, the tightness in his jaw and around his eyes. He waited. It came in a different voice, with a different expression, flatly. What do you want? Said Guillaume. I mean, standing fucking ovation. Laurent, Prince of Vere, everybody. Shit. Oh my god. I can't accurately describe why I love him. We're on, excuse me, so sorry. The brilliance just made all thoughts leave me. We're on page 31 now, at the end of chapter 2. It is a little after 4, which means we'll be right back. I am going to go, maybe I'll make some tea or something really quick. At the very least, we get up, we stretch, we walk around, we bask in the gloriousness that is Laurent, Prince of Vere, and we will be back in just a few minutes for the second half of this reading stream. Oh, that was so... I can't. I'll be right back. Please enjoy the Gaywatch break room. And we are back. I have some tea and zero chill about being at page 31 for chapter 3. Chapter 3. We've only done 2 chapters so far, and depending on the lengths, we may not actually get to chapter 5. However, the pace at which we are going through this feels really nice for me anyway. So I'm actually kind of low-key okay with not reaching chapter 5 today because it seems to be flowing very well at the pace that we're going. Whew. Shout out to Henry for coining the phrase, beefcake moral compass. Well done, Henry. That is now how we shall be describing Damon for the foreseeable future. Whew. All right. Okay. Where the heck are we going now? Damon looked out at the sweep of the field. The Regent's forces were rivers of darker red, driving inroads into their lines, mingling their armies together like a stream of blood hitting water, then diffusing. The whole vista was one of destruction, an unending stream of enemies, so numerous they were like a swarm. But he had seen at Marlis how one man could hold a front together, as if by will alone. "Prince Killer!" screamed the Regent's men. In the beginning they had thrown themselves towards him, but when they saw what happened to the men who did that, they became a churning mass of hooves, trying to fall back. They didn't get far. Damon's sword hit armor, hit flesh. He sought out centers of power and broke them, stopping formations before they began. A Varetian commander challenged him, and he allowed one ringing engagement before his sword sheared through the commander's neck. Faces were impersonal flashes, half shielded by helms. He was more aware of horses and swords, the machinery of death. He killed, and it was simply that men got out of his way or were dead. Everything narrowed to one purpose: determination sustaining power and concentration beyond human endurance over hours, longer than one's opponent, because the man who made a mistake was dead. He lost half his men in the first wave. After that, he took the charges head on, killing as many as were necessary to stop the first wave, and the second, and the third. Fresh reinforcements arriving at that moment would have been able to slaughter them all like weak old pups, but Damon had no reinforcements. If he was aware of anything beyond the fight, it was of an absence, a lack that persisted. The flashes of brilliance, the insouciant sword work, the bright presence at his side was instead a gap, half filled by Nikandros' steadier, more practical style. He had grown used to something that had been temporary, like the flash of exhilaration in a pair of blue eyes, for a moment catching his own. All of that tangled together inside him and tightened, through the killing, into a single hard knot. "If the Prince of Ver shows himself, I will kill him," Nikandros half spat the words. The arrows by now were less, because Damon had broken enough lines that firing into the chaos was dangerous for both sides. Why is a fly trying to get in the way of me reading this? Thank you. The sounds were different, too. No longer roars and screams, but grunts of pain, exhaustion, sobs of breath, the clang of swords heavier and less frequent. Hours of death. The battle entered its final, brutal, exhausted stage. Lines broke and dissolved into mess, degraded geometry, heaving pits of straining flesh where it was hard to tell an enemy from a friend. Damon stayed on horseback, though bodies on the ground were so thick that the horses foundered. The ground was wet, his legs were mud-spattered above his knees, mud in dry summer, because the ground was blood. Thrashing wounded horses screamed louder than the screams of men. He held the men around him together, and killed, his body pushed beyond the physical, beyond thought. On the far side of the field, he saw the flash of embroidered red. That is how Achaeans win wars, isn't it? Why fight the whole army when you can just... Damon drove his spurs into his horse and charged. The men between him and his object were a blur. He barely heard the ringing of his own sword or noticed the red cloaks of the Varetian honor guard before he hewed them down. He simply killed them, one after another, until there was no one left between himself and the man he sought. Damon's sword sheared the air in its unstoppable arc and cleaved the man in the crowned helm in two. His body listed unnaturally, then hit the ground. Damon dismounted and tore the helm off. It wasn't the regent. He didn't know who it was. A pawn, a puppet, his dead eyes wide, caught up in this like the rest of them. Damon flung the helm aside. "It's over," Nikandros' voice. "It's over, Damon." Damon looked up blindly. Nikandros' armor was sliced open across the chest, where he was bleeding from a cut, the front plate missing. He used the little name that Damon had been called as a boy. The childhood name, reserved for intimates. You're going to drop that detail on us now? Damon realized that he was on his knees, his own chest heaving like the chest of his horse. His hand was fisted in the fabric of the dead man's sigil. It felt like closing his hands on nothing. Over. The word grated out of him. All he could think was that if the regent still lived, nothing was over. That's a real salient observation. I would hold on to that one. Thought was slow to return after so long living by action and reaction, the responses of the moment. He needed to come back to himself. Men were dropping weapons around him. I hardly know whether the victory is ours or theirs. It is ours, said Nikandros. There was a different look in Nikandros' eyes, and as Damon looked around at the ruined battlefield, he saw the men staring at him from a distance. The look in Nikandros' eyes echoed in their expressions. And with returning awareness, he saw, as if for the first time, the bodies of the men that he had killed to get to the regent's decoy, and beyond that, the evidence of what he had done. The field was rutted earthwork strewn with the dead. The ground was a churned mess of flesh, ineffective armor, and riderless horses. Killing ceaselessly for hours, he had not been aware of the scale of it, of what he had caused to happen here. He saw flashes behind his eyelids, faces of the men he'd killed. Those left standing were all Achillean, and they stared at Damon as at something impossible. Find the highest-ranked Varetian still living and tell them they have to leave to bury their dead, said Damon. There was a fallen Achillean banner on the ground beside him. Charie is claimed for Achilleos. As he rose, Damon wrapped his hand around its wooden pole and planted it in the earth. The banner was torn, and it stood lopsided, weighed down by the mud that spattered over its fabric, but it held. And that was when he saw it, as in a dream, appearing out of the fog of his exhaustion, on the far western edge of the field. The herald came cantering across the devastated landscape on a white, glossy mare with a curved neck and a high, flying tail. Beautiful and untouched, he made a mockery of the sacrifice of the brave men on the field. His banner streamed out behind him, and its blazon was Laurent's starburst, in blue and shining gold. The herald reined in front of him. Damon looked at the mare's shiny coat, not dirt-covered, not heaving or darkened with sweat, and then at the herald's livery, in immaculate condition, unflecked by the dust of the road. He felt it rising at the back of his throat. Where is he? The herald's back hit the ground. Damon had dragged him bodily from his horse into the dirt, where he lay dazed and winded, with Damon's knee in his stomach. Damon's hand was around his neck. His own breath was harsh. Around him, every sword was drawn, every arrow notched and ready. His grip tightened before it opened enough to allow the herald to speak. The herald rolled onto his side and coughed as Damon released him. He pulled something from inside his jacket. Parchment, with 2 lines on it. You have Charie. I have Fortaine. He stared at the words, written in familiar, unmistakable handwriting. I'll receive you at my fort. That's a scene break. It's just one banger after another. Fortaine eclipsed even Ravenel, powerful and beautiful, its towers high-flung, its jutting crenelles biting the sky. It rose to a sheer impossible height, and from every vantage it was flying Laurent's banners. The pennant seemed to float on the air effortlessly, patterned silk in blue and gold. Damon reined in as they crested the hill. You know, I'm sorry. Yeah, hang on. I just have to go back to a second to I'll receive you at my fort. outside of the joke that could be made there, the possibility that Laurent is distinctly aware of the double entendre is not zero. That is kind of exactly the kind of thing that he would say at such an inappropriate moment. Damon reined in as they crested the hill, his army a dark fringe of banners and spears behind him. His order to ride had been unforgiving, calling on his men, the battle barely over. Of the 3,000 Achaeans who had fought at Charie, just over half had survived. They had ridden, fought and ridden again, leaving behind only a garrison to attend to the bodies, the scattered armor and ownerless weapons. Jord and the other Varetians who had stayed to fight were riding with him in a small clump, nervy and uncertain of what to do. By that time, Damon had received the tally of the dead. 1,200 of us, 6,500 of them. He knew the men were behaving differently towards him since the battle's end, falling behind as he passed. He had seen their looks of fear and stunned awe. Most of them had not fought with him before. Perhaps they hadn't known what to expect. Now they were here. They had arrived, dirt and grime covered, wounded, some of them, pushing past exhaustion because it was what discipline demanded of them, to look out at the sight that greeted them. Rows upon rows of peaked-colored tents were pitched on the field outside Fortain's walls, the sun lighting the pavilions, the banners, and the silks of a graceful encampment. It was a city of tents, and it camped a fresh, intact force of Laurent's men, who had not fought and died through the morning. The constructed arrogance of the display was intentional. It said exquisitely, "Did you exert yourself at Charie? I have been here examining my nails." Nikandros reined in alongside him. Uncle and nephew are alike. They send other men to do their fighting for them. Damon was silent. What he felt in his chest was a hardness, like anger. He looked at the elegant silken city and thought about men dying on the field at Charie. Some kind of herald's greeting party was riding towards them. He gripped the regent's bloody, torn banner in his hand. "Just me," said Damon, and put his heels into his horse. About halfway across the field, he was met by the herald, who arrived with an anxious party of 4 attendants saying something urgent about protocol. Damon listened to 4 words of it. "Don't worry," said Damon. "He's expecting me." Inside the encampment, he swung down off his horse and tossed the reins to a passing servant, ignoring the flurry of activity that his arrival provoked, the heralds cantering in desperately behind him. Without even pulling off his gauntlets, he strode to the tent. He knew its high scalloped folds, he knew the starburst pennant. No one stopped him, not even when he reached the tent and dismissed the soldier at the entrance with a single order: "Go." He didn't bother to see if his order was obeyed. The soldier let him through. Of course he did. This had all been planned. Laurent was ready for him, whether he came docilely behind the herald, or as he did now, the dirt and the sweat of the battle still on him, blood dried in the places where a cursory swipe with a cloth had not reached it. He swept the tent flap back with an arm and stepped inside. Silken privacy as the tent flap settled behind him. He stood in a pavilion tent, its high ceiling canopied like a flower head, supported by 6 thick interior poles wrapped in spiraled silk. It was enclosing despite its size, the fall of the flap enough to mute the sounds from outside. This was the place Laurent had chosen. He made himself acquainted with it. There were a few furnishings, low seats, cushions, and in the background a trestle table hung with its own coverings, and set with shallow bowls of sugared pears and oranges, as though they were going to nibble at sweetmeats. He lifted his gaze from the table to the exquisitely attired figure leaning with a single shoulder against the tent pole, watching him. Laurent said, "Hello, lover." It was not going to be simple. Damon forced himself to take it in. He forced himself to take it all in, and to stroll himself inside the tent so that he stood in the elegant surrounds and full armor, crushing delicate embroidered silks under his muddied feet. He threw the regent's banner down onto the table. It clattered in a mess of mud and stained silk, then turned his eyes to Laurent. He wondered what Laurent saw when he looked at him. He knew he looked different. Charie is one. I thought it would be. He made himself breathe through that. Your men think you're a coward. Nikandros thinks that you deceived us, that you sent us to Charie and left us there to die by your uncle's sword. And is that what you think? Said Laurent. No, said Damon. Nikandros doesn't know you. And you do. Damon looked at the arrangement of Laurent's weight, the careful way he was holding his body. Laurent's left hand was still casually resting against the tent pole. Deliberately, he stepped forward and clasped Laurent's right shoulder. Nothing for a moment. Damon tightened his grip and ground in with his thumb, harder. He watched Laurent turn ashen. Finally, Laurent said, "Stop." He let go. Laurent had wrenched back and was clutching his shoulder, where the blue of his doublet had darkened. Blood welling up from some newly bandaged subterranean place, and Laurent was staring at him, his eyes oddly wide. You wouldn't break an oath, said Damon, past the feeling in his chest. Even to me. He had to force himself back. The tent was large enough to accommodate the movement, 4 paces between them. Laurent didn't answer. He still had a hand clutched to his shoulder, his fingers sticky with blood. Laurent said, "Even to you." He made himself look at Laurent. The truth was an awful presence in his chest. He thought of the single night they had spent together. He thought of Laurent giving himself, dark-eyed and vulnerable, and of the regent, who knew how to break a man. Outside, 2 armies were poised to fight. The moment was here, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He remembered the regent's constant suggestion, "Bed my nephew." He had done that, wooed him, won him. Charie, he saw, hadn't mattered to the regent. It hadn't meant anything. The regent's real weapon against Laurent had always been Damon himself. "I've come to tell you who I am." Laurent was so keenly familiar. The shade of his hair, the strapped-down clothing, the full lips that he held tense or cruelly repressed, the ruthless asceticism, the unbearable blue eyes. "I know who you are, Damianos," said Laurent. Damon heard it, as the interior of the tent seemed to change, so that all of the objects in it took on a different shape. "Did you think," said Laurent, "I wouldn't recognize the man who killed my brother?" Absolutely fucking wild how I was so caught up in the whole Damon getting stood up at the battlefield and being so angry about that, and, you know, showing up and Laurent has a wounded arm and like all of that. I got so caught up in all of that that I kind of forgot about how now is the time where we have to reveal who we are, and now's the time where we get to learn that Laurent knew. Because I'd forgotten how exactly and when exactly that gets established. I'm just arranging my absolutely atrocious hair, because this is what happens when you think that you've showered early enough ahead of time that your hair will be dried naturally by the time you have to be on a live stream reading gay things, and then you're incorrect, and so your hair just kind of looks awful the whole time, and you don't care because Laurent knew. Each word was an ice chip, painful, sharp, a shard. Laurent's voice was perfectly steady. Damon stepped back blindly. His thoughts swam. "I knew in the palace, when they dragged you in front of me," said Laurent. The words continued, steady, relentless. "I knew in the baths when I ordered you flayed. I knew at Ravenel, said Damon, drawing breath with difficulty. He faced Laurent while seconds passed. If you knew, said Damon, how could you let you fuck me? His own chest hurt, so that he almost didn't notice the signs of it in Laurent, the control, the face, pale at any time, now white. I needed a victory at Charie. You provided it. It was worth enduring. Laurent spoke the terrible, lucid words. Your fumbling attentions for that. It hurt so much it took the breath from his throat. You're lying. Damon's heart was pounding. You're lying. The words were too loud. You thought I was leaving. You practically threw me out. He said it as the realization blossomed inside him. You knew who I was. You knew who I was the night we made love. He thought of Laurent surrendering. Not the first time, but the second. The slower, sweeter time. The tension in him. The way he had... You weren't making love to a slave. You were making love to me. And he couldn't think that through clearly. But he could catch a glimmer of it. A glimmer of the edge of it. I thought you wouldn't. I thought you'd never... He took a step forward. Laurent, 6 years ago, when I fought Auguste, I... Don't you say his name. The words were forced out of Laurent. Don't you ever say his name. You killed my brother. Laurent was breathing shallowly, almost panting as he spoke, his hands rigid on the edge of the table behind him. Is that what you want to hear? That I knew who you were and I still let you fuck me, my brother's killer, who cut him down like an animal on the field? No, said Damon, his stomach clenching with cramp. That isn't... Shall I ask you how you did it? What he looked like when your sword went in? No, said Damon. Or shall I tell you about the illusion of the man who gave me good counsel, who stood by me, who never lied to me? I never lied to you. The words were awful in the silence that followed them. Laurent, I am your slave, said Laurent. He felt the breath forced out from his lungs. Don't, he said, talk about it like it was cold-blooded, like I controlled it, like we didn't both close our eyes and pretend I was a slave. He made himself say the exposing words. I was your slave. There was no slave, said Laurent. He never existed. I don't know what manner of man stands before me now. All I know is that I am facing him for the first time. He's here. His flesh ached as if he had been prized open. We are the same. Kneel then, said Laurent. Kiss my boot. He looked into Laurent's, excoriating blue eyes. The impossibility of it was like a sharp pain. He couldn't do it. He could only gaze at Laurent across the distance between them. The words hurt. You're right. I'm not a slave, he said. I am the king, he said. I killed your brother, and now I hold your fort. As he spoke, Damon drew out a knife. He felt rather than saw all of Laurent's attention swing to it. The physical signs were small. Laurent's lips parted, his body tensed. Laurent didn't look at the knife. He kept his eyes on Damon, who looked right back at him. So you will parley with me, as with a king, and you will tell me why you called me here. Deliberately, Damon tossed the knife onto the floor of the tent. Laurent's eyes didn't follow its path. His gaze held steady. Didn't you know, said Laurent. My uncle is in Achielos. Fucking what? That's the end of chapter 3. Holy Jesus, God in heaven. Oh my God. Oh my God. We don't have time to unpack all that. There's too much. There's simply too much to unpack. What the fuck? Jesus. We're on page 45 for chapter 4. Finally getting to Laurent knowing and having known the whole time. Because, I mean, he clocked his scar. And, like, and in hindsight, you're like, well, of course he fucking knew. And, like, this is why there's essentially two first times that you read a trilogy like Captive Prince. There's, like, the first time, and then there's the second first time, where you go and you reread it knowing everything. And it just entirely puts a new context over everything. This is why people reread it so much, because there's so much going on. And yet, it's not overly long or anything like that. It uses every single scrap of real estate that it needs, and no more and no less. Ah! Laurent, he said, what have you done? Does it bother you to think of him hurting your country? You know it does. Are we playing now with the fate of nations? It won't bring your brother back. There was a violent silence. This is how we open the chapter? Jesus Christ! We're not even at triple-digit page numbers yet, and I'm already like, no wonder this is my favorite. No, this makes all the sense in the world. You know, my uncle knew who you were, said Laurent. He spent this whole time waiting for us to fuck. He wanted to tell me who you were himself and watch it wreck me. Oh, had you guessed that? You just thought you'd fuck me anyway. Couldn't help yourself. You ordered me to your room, said Damon, and pushed me down on the bed. I said, don't do this. You said, kiss me, said Laurent, each word enunciated clearly. You said, Laurent, I need to be inside you. You feel so good, Laurent. He switched to Achielin, as Damon had at the climax. It's never felt like this. I can't hold on. I'm going to... Stop, said Damon. He was breathing in quick, shallow breaths, as he might after heavy exertion. He stared at Laurent. Charie, said Laurent, was a distraction. I have it from Guillaume. My uncle sailed for Eos 3 days ago, and by now he has made landfall. Damon moved 3 steps away to let that information sink in. He found himself with his hand braced on one of the tent poles. I see. And my men are to die fighting him for you, the way that they did at Charie. Laurent's smile was not pleasant. On that table is a list of supplies and troops. I will give it to you in support of your campaign to the south. In exchange for, said Damon steadily. Delpha, said Laurent in the same tone. He felt the shock that made him remember that this was Laurent and not any other young man of 20. The province of Delpha belonged to Nikandros, his friend and supporter, who had pledged to him in trust. It was valuable in its own right, richly fertile, with a strong seaport. It had symbolic value, too, as the site of Achielos's greatest victory and Vare's greatest defeat. Its return would strengthen Laurent's position, but weaken his own. He had not come here prepared to negotiate. Laurent had. Laurent was here as the Prince of Vare facing the King of Achielos. Laurent had known who he was all along. The list, written in Laurent's own hand, had been prepared before this meeting. The thought of the regent and his country was a danger that was almost sickening in its intensity. The regent already controlled the Achielin Palace Guard, which had been his gift to Castor. Now the regent himself was in Eos, his troops poised at any moment to take the capital on his command, and Damon was here, hundreds of miles away, facing Laurent and his impossible ultimatum. He said, "Did you plan this from the beginning?" The hard part was getting Guillaume to let me into his fort. Laurent said it steadily, the private edge to his voice a little more private than usual. Damon said, "In the palace you had me beaten, drugged, whipped, and you asked me to give up Delpha. Why don't you tell me instead why I shouldn't simply hand you over to your uncle in exchange for his aid against Castor? Because I knew who you were, said Laurent. And when you killed Tuar and humiliated my uncle's faction, I sent the news of it echoing to every corner of my country, so that if you ever crawled back onto your throne, there would be no possibility of an alliance between you and my uncle. Do you want to play this game against me? I will take you apart. Take me apart, Damon said deliberately. If I opposed you, the remaining scrap of land you hold would have a different enemy on each side, and your efforts would be split in 3 directions. Believe me, said Laurent, when I say that you would have my undivided attention. Damon let his eyes pass over Laurent slowly, where he stood. You're alone. You don't have allies. You don't have friends. You've proven true everything your uncle ever said about you. You made deals with Achielos. You even betted in Achielan, and by now, everyone knows it. You're clinging to independence with a single fort and the tatters of a reputation. He gave every word its weight. So let me tell you the terms of this alliance. You will give me everything on this list, and in return I will aid you against your uncle. Delpha remains with Achielos. Let's not pretend you have anything here worth a bargain. There was a silence after he spoke. He and Laurent stood 3 paces from one another. There's something else I have, said Laurent, that you want. Laurent's cool blue eyes were on him, his pose relaxed where he stood, with all the filtered light of the tent in his lashes. Damon felt those words working on him, his body reacting almost against his will. Guion, said Laurent, has agreed to testify in writing to the details of the deal that he brokered between Castor and my uncle during his time as ambassador. Damon flushed. It was not what he had expected Laurent to say, and Laurent knew it. For a moment, what was unsaid hung thickly between them. Please, said Laurent, insult me further. Tell me more about my tattered reputation. Tell me all the ways that bending over for you has damaged my position, as if being fucked into the mattress by the king of Achielos could be anything other than demeaning. I am dying to hear it. Laurent, did you think, said Laurent, that I would come here without the means to enforce my terms? I hold the only proof of Castor's treachery that extends beyond your word. My word is enough to the men that matter. Is it? Then by all means, reject my offer. I will execute Guion for treason and hold the letter over the nearest candle. Damon's hands became fists. He felt fundamentally outmaneuvered, even as he could see that Laurent was bargaining alone, with very little, for his political life. Laurent had to be desperate to propose fighting alongside Achielos, alongside Damianos of Achielos. Are we going to play another kind of pretend? Damon said. That it never happened. If you are concerned it will go unmentioned between us, never fear. Every man in my camp knows that you served me in bed. And that is how it is to be between us, said Damon. Mercenary. Cold. How did you think it would be? Said Laurent. You take me to your bed for the public consummation? It hurt. Damon said, I won't do this without Nikandros, and he won't give up Delpha. He will when you give him Eos. It was too neat. He hadn't thought as far as Castor's defeat, or who would become Kairos and Eos, the traditional seat of the king's closest advisor. Nikandros was the ideal candidate. I see you thought of everything, said Damon, bitterly. It didn't have to be. You could have come to me and asked for my help. I would have killed the rest of my family. Laurent sat it standing straight back before the table, his gaze unwavering. Thickly, Damon remembered running his sword through the man he'd believed was the regent, as if killing the regent would be his expiation. It wouldn't. He thought of all Laurent had done here, every piece of impersonal leverage, to control this meeting, to ensure it played out on his terms. Congratulations, said Damon. You forced my hand. You have what you want. Delpha in exchange for your aid in the south. Nothing given freely, nothing done out of feeling, everything coerced, with bloodless planning. Then I have your agreement. Say it. You have my agreement. Good, said Laurent. He took a step back. Then, as if a pillar of control had finally collapsed, Laurent surrendered his full weight to the table behind him, his face drained of all color. He was trembling, his hairline pricked with the sweat of injury. He said, "Now get out." Again, it's not that Damon is a bad deal maker. The fact that he kind of even remotely held his own before being utterly demolished by Laurent speaks to his ability. It's just that Laurent is Laurent. And when you're up against someone like Laurent, even getting to the point that Damon had when he was like, actually, this is how it's going to be for the following reasons, that was very well reasoned and very well thought out, and a great response, especially coming fresh off of battle, not expecting to walk into a negotiation. That was a very salient point. That probably would have been the end of it for most negotiations. Except, this is Laurent. Unfortunately. The intermingling of political negotiation with sexual history is being injected directly into my veins. That's the good shit. When we talk about the good gay shit, that's the good gay shit that I mean. This exactly. It was everything. It was politically savvy and had displays of intelligence from both sides, which any sapiosexuals in the audience, and I know there's quite a few, I'm included, that added to the overall hotness, with the wrongness of the cruelty bantering back and forth, mostly from Laurent, but again, that's understandable. And then having some of the full weight of Laurent's resentment, to put it mildly, lingering from, the fact that Damon killed his brother, the only, person he ever really loved who was ever really on his side. And, just there's still quite a chasm to be crossed, which was probably really important to establish early on in the third book, because by the end of the second one, you're like, oh, well, they're on each other's side now. We've done the enemies to lovers thing, and now we just get to be on the same team for book 3. No, there's still quite a bit of ocean that they have to cross if this is going to happen. Ooh, illustrated beautifully and brutally by that whole ass scene. That was a scene break. Did I say that? We're on page 51. Oh, wait, God, it's just a few minutes before. No, come on. We got to get farther than that. Okay, we're going to get to the end of chapter 4. We are not going to get to chapter 5 today. Whew. The herald was speaking to him. Damon heard it as if from very far away, and understood, at length, that there was a small party of his own men here to ride with him back to his camp. He spoke words to the herald, or thought he did, because the herald went away and left him to mount his horse. He put his hand on the saddle before he mounted, and for a moment closed his eyes. Laurent, who had no... Hello... I'm tangled up and way too excited. But I read for a living. It's gonna be fine. Laurent had known who he was, and had still made love to him. He wondered what mix of yearning and self-delusion had allowed Laurent to do that. He was battered by what had happened. Bruised and aching, his whole body throbbed. He had not felt the blows struck against him in battle until now, when they all came together. The unsteady physical exhaustion of the melee was on him. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. If he'd imagined it, it was as a single cataclysmic event, an unmasking that, whatever followed, would be over. Violence would have been both punishment and release. He had never imagined that it would instead go on, that the truth had been known, that it had been painfully absorbed, that it would be this crushing pressure that wouldn't leave his chest. Laurent had tamped down the smothered emotion in his eyes, and would endure an alliance with his brother's killer, though he felt nothing but aversion. If he could do it, Damon could do it. He could make impersonal negotiations, speak in the formal language of kings. The ache of loss didn't make sense, because Laurent had never been his. He had known that. The delicate thing that had grown between them had never had a right to exist. It had always had an end date. Too much excitement. Reel it in. It had always had an end date, the moment that Damon reassumed his mantle. Now he had to return with these men to his own camp. The ride back was brief. Less than a half-mile separated their armies. He made it, with his duty firm in his mind. If it hurt, it was fitting. It was simply kingship. She's gotta be fucking kidding me. She can't be serious. These past 52 pages, she can't be serious. Like, be so fucking for real right now. Who can do this? Who? How? What do you... Every single scene has been, like... That was a sing break. Did I say that? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. There was still one thing that he had to do. When he finally dismounted, an Achillean city of tents had risen up to mirror the Venetian one on his orders. He slid down from the saddle and passed off his reins to a soldier. He was very tired by now in a purely physical way that he felt as an effort of concentration. He had to put aside the tremor in his muscles, in his arms and legs. On the eastern side of the camp was his own tent, which offered sheets, a pallet, a place to close his eyes, and rest. He didn't enter it. He called Nikandros to the command tent instead, raised in the center of the army encampment. It was now night, and the entrance of the tent was lit by torch posts that flamed orange at waist height. Inside, 6 braziers made jumping shadows out of the table, the chairs set to face the entrance, an audience throne. Even making camp so close to a Venetian troop had the men on edge. They had superfluous patrols and galloping horsemen with every nerve on alert. If a Venetian threw a pebble, the entire army would launch into action. They didn't know yet why they were making camp here. They had simply obeyed his orders. Nikandros would be the first to hear the news. He remembered Nikandros' pride the day that Theomedes had given him Delpha. It had meant more than the bestowal of lands or stone and mortar. It had been proof to Nikandros that he had honored the memory of his father. Now Damon was going to take it from him, in a piece of cold-blooded statesmanship. He waited, not turning away from what it meant, now, to be king. If he could give Laurent up, he could do this. Oh, my boy has it bad. Oh, he's like far gone. He's way gone. He's way just over dipped beyond the horizon. He is so far gone. He could not be more far gone. In all of the complicatedness surrounding them, it doesn't change just how far fucking gone Damon is... Whoo! Whoo! Nikandros came into the tent. It wasn't pleasant, the offer or the price. Nikandros couldn't completely hide the hurt as he searched for understanding that he didn't find. Damon gazed back at him, unbending and unflinching. They had played together as boys, but now Nikandros faced his king. The Varetian prince is to be given my home, and he is to be your primary ally in this war. Yes. And you have made up your mind. I have. Damon remembered hoping for a homecoming where it could be between them as it was in the old days, as if friendship of that kind could survive statesmanship. She's got to stop giving me lines like this. He's playing us against each other, said Nikandros. This is calculated. He's trying to weaken you. Damon said, I know. It's like him. Then Nikandros stopped and turned away in frustration. He kept you as a slave. He left us at Charie. There was a reason for that, but I am not to know it. The list of supplies and men Laurent was offering them lay on the table. It had been more than Damon would have expected, but it was also finite. It was roughly the size of Nikandros' contribution, equal to the addition of another Kairos, perhaps, to his side. It was not worth Delpha. He could see that Nikandros knew it, as Damon had known it. I would make this easier, said Damon, if I could. Silence, while Nikandros kept his words in check. Damon said, Who will I lose? Macedon, said Nikandros. Straighten. The northern bannermen, maybe. In Achielos, you'll find your allies less helpful, the commoners less welcoming, even hostile. There will be problems with troop cohesion on the march, and more problems in battle. He said, Tell me what else. The men will talk, said Nikandros. He was pushing the words out with distaste. He did not want to say it. About... Damon said, No. And then, as though Nikandros couldn't help the words that came out next, if you would at least take off the cuff... No, it stays. He refused to lower his eyes. Nikandros turned away and put his palms flat on the table, resting his weight there. Damon could see the resistance in Nikandros' shoulders, bunched across his back, his palms still flat on the table. Into the painful silence, Damon said, And you? Will I lose you? It was all he allowed himself. It came out in a steady enough voice, and he made himself wait and say nothing more. As though the words were coming up from the depths of him, against his will, Nikandros said, I want Eos. Damon let out a breath. Laurent, he realized suddenly, wasn't playing them against one another. He was playing to Nikandros. There was a dangerous expertise in all of this, in knowing how far Nikandros' loyalty might be stretched, and what would keep it from snapping. Laurent's presence in the room was almost tangible. Listen to me, Damianos. If you have ever valued my counsel, listen. He is not on our side. He is Varetian, and he'll be bringing an army into our country. To fight his uncle, not to fight us. If someone kills your family, you don't rest until they are dead. The words dropped between them. He remembered Laurent's eyes in the tent as he had procured this alliance for himself. Nikandros was shaking his head. Or do you really think he's forgiven you for killing his brother? No. He hates me for it. He said it steadily, without flinching. But he hates his uncle more. He needs us, and we need him. You need him enough that you would strip me of my home because he asked you to. Yes, said Damon. He watched Nikandros struggle with that. I'm doing this for Achielos, said Damon. Nikandros said, If you're wrong, there is no Achielos. This has to stop. This has to stop. This has to stop. This has to what? I've read this before and I'm overwhelmed. He spoke to a few that was a scene break. Did I say that? I don't know. He spoke to a few soldiers on his way back to his tent, a word or two here or there as he moved through the camp, a habit since his first command at 17. The men came to attention as he passed and said only, exalted, if he spoke. It was not like sitting around a campfire swilling wine, exchanging low tales and ribald speculations. Jord and the other Varetians from Ravenel had been sent back to Laurent to rejoin his army in the extravagant tents at Fortaine. Damon hadn't seen them go. It was a warm night, with no need for fires other than for cooking and for light. He knew his way because the rigorous lines of the Achelan camp were easy to follow even in torchlight. The drilled, disciplined troops had done quick and efficient work. The weapons were cleaned and stored, the fires were lit, the stout tent pegs were hammered into the ground. His tent was made of plain white canvas. There was not much to distinguish it other than its size and the two guards standing armed at the entrance. They came to attention, honor-flushed at the duty. It showed more in the younger guard, Pallas, than the older Octus. It's either... it might be Octus. But was evident in the stance of both. Damon made sure he gave a brief sign of his appreciation as he passed, as was fitting. He lifted the tent flap, let it settle behind him. Inside, the tent was an austere open space, lit with grease candles on spikes. The privacy was like a blessing. He didn't have to hold himself up. He could let the weight of exhaustion bear him down to rest. His body ached for it. He wanted only to prise his armor from himself and close his eyes. Alone, he didn't have to be king. He stopped and went cold, an awful feeling passing over him, an unsteadiness that was like nausea. He wasn't alone. She was naked, at the base of the stark pallet, her full breasts hanging downwards, her forehead to the floor. She didn't have palace training, and so could not quite disguise the fact that she was nervous. Her fair hair was caught back from her face in a fragile clasp, a northern custom. She was perhaps 19 or 20, her body trained and ready for him. She had prepared a bath in an unadorned wooden tub, so that if he pleased, he might make use of it, or of her. He had known that there were slaves with Nikandros' army, following behind with the carts and the supplies. He had known that when he returned to Achelos, there would be slaves. Get up, he heard himself say, awkwardly, a wrong order for a slave. There was a time when he would have expected this, and known how to behave around it. He would have appreciated the charm of her rustic northern skills, and betted her, if not tonight, then certainly in the morning. Nikandros knew him, and she was his type. She was Nikandros' best, that was evident. A slave from his personal retinue, perhaps even his favorite, because Damon was his guest and his king. She got up. He didn't speak. She had a collar around her neck, and metal cuffs around her small wrists that were like the one that he... Exalted, she said quietly. What is wrong? He let out a strange, unsteady breath. He realized that his breathing had been unsteady for some time, that his flesh was unsteady, that the silence had been stretching out between them too long. No slaves, said Damon. Tell the keeper. Send no one else. For the length of the campaign I will be dressed by an adjutant or a squire. Yes, Exalted, she said, obedient and confused and hiding it, or trying to, making for the tent entrance, her cheeks red. Wait. He couldn't send her naked through the camp. Here, he unpinned his cloak and whirled it around her shoulders. He felt the wrongness of it, pushing against every protocol. The guard will escort you back. Yes, Exalted, she said, because she could not say anything else. And she left him, thankfully, alone. And that's the end of chapter 4. That's the first 4 chapters of King's Rising. That's the first 60 pages of King's Rising. That's the first Oh, you know what's funny about that? Kind of besides everything. You know what's funny about that? The first 50 pages of the first book also hits really hard. We have had this conversation before. We have been here. Except now it's 60 pages. And now it's book 3. Absolutely not. We're on page 60 for chapter 5. That'll be where we pick up. How? Just how? I'm overwhelmed and marveling and feeling now more than ever the overwhelming impulse to not say as much because I don't want to betray the moment, so to speak. Well, I don't know how we're going to do it, but on Thursday, before this reading stream, we're going to talk about the first 4 chapters before we start reading on Thursday at 2:15 for patrons and YouTube members. If you would like to have a debrief almost, if you would like to have a debrief about what the fuck we just read and how it's excellent all the way down, because there are so many things at play. It is such a combination of payoffs, but then also more promises, because you're starting a book, but you're starting the 3rd book in a trilogy. And so this is where all the payoffs happen, but you also have to set up the arc for the last book, which means you're making a bunch of promises and you're establishing a bunch of conflicts and you're setting up the stakes for the entire book. And she has done all of this in 60 pages and 4 chapters. All right. I'll be back on Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm gonna go scream for a little while now. And I'll see you on Thursday for more of Captive Prince King's Rising. And then a chat beforehand if you'd like to join us. I hope you're having a good start to your week. And I hope it continues to be good for you. I'll see you on Thursday for more of this. Please take care of yourselves. Holy shit.